Hi there, I'm Kristina from Inverted Atlas. So I'm going to be giving the lecture on the evolution of the pyramids today. If we could keep our mics on mute until the end, we will have question time. And we are recording because a fair few people have indicated to me via email that they can't make the time and they want to watch the recording, which is completely fine. So we'll get on with the lecture. I will just share my screen here. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a chat about pyramid building today. So basically, just as an introduction, so pyramids didn't suddenly appear in Egypt. They were designed specifically as a device by which the pharaoh could ascend to the sky and join the sun god Ra in the heavens. If you examine pyramid building chronologically from the very first pharaohs that were buried in the sand, you can see there's a clear learning process in regards to architecture, engineering, and geometry. Although the ancient Egyptians left clues behind about pyramid building, archaeologists still haven't discovered exactly how they were built, which I think we all know. It's important to remember that when we're discussing this topic, we're talking about people and technology that is thousands and thousands of years old. Nobody left any instructions behind, and we likely never will have the answer. A lot of it is just speculation based on the evidence available. The most important thing to remember, and this obviously speaks to the theories about aliens and such, which I will tell you now I don't subscribe to. A lot of these theories come about because people think ancient people were of lesser intelligence than we are. It's very important to realize that the ancient Egyptian people were the exact same species as us. So they are Homo sapiens sapiens, which we are. They had the same brain power as us in people in today's civilization. And just as our civilization put our best minds on sending people to the moon and we achieved that, the ancient Egyptians put their people's best minds into moving giant blocks of stone. Just because we can't figure it out, doesn't mean they couldn't figure it out. And in thousands of years, when people find evidence of the moon landing in books, they're going to say, how did they do that? And they're probably going to come to the same conclusion that they must have had some kind of outside help in the form of aliens. So I don't subscribe to that. So if you're here for aliens, this is not the lecture for you. This is a bit of a timeline leading up to the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So ancient Egyptians started burying their kings, as far as we can tell, in around 3200 BC, which is around 1200 years before the pyramids were actually built. And the very first tomb is ascribed, and when I say ascribed, it means the evidence suggests, but we can't know for sure, to a king called Scorpion, who ruled Egypt before Egypt was even a unified country. And his tomb is tomb UJ at a place called Abydos in the middle of the country. It's a very simple tomb with 2 chambers and some grave goods. And at the time, Abydos was the holiest of burial grounds in ancient Egypt. It was the cult center of Osiris, the god of the dead. And if you're familiar with the story of Horus and Seth, when Seth cut his brother up into 100 pieces and scattered him all over Egypt, Abydos was where Osiris's head landed. So this was the most sacred spot in Egypt. Around 100 years later, there's evidence of mastaba building in ancient Egypt. So these were the first superstructures. So a pyramid, like the one you see behind me, this is what we call a superstructure in archaeology. So the superstructure is like a huge grave marker. So mastaba tombs are kind of like, mastaba is actually the Arabic word for bench, and they do like a bit of a big bench. And underneath they had subterranean chambers, but we'll have a look at mastabas later. So in 2670 BC, the very first pyramid was built in Egypt that we can tell. It's the step pyramid of Pharaoh Zoser. It was designed by his master architect Imhotep. And it appears to be designed by placing one mastaba on top of another, like a child would stack blocks one on top of another. In 575 BC, the world's very first true pyramid was constructed. Now, this wasn't the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's a common misconception. It was the Red Pyramid, which was built by Pharaoh Snefru, who was Khufu's father. And then in 465 BC, we have the construction of the Great Pyramid. So that you can already see that the ancient Egyptians in that, relatively short time, as far as their history goes, learned a lot in that short space. So this is the beginning. This is the beginning. This is what we call a pit tomb. So this is at Abydos. This is not Scorpion's tomb. This is actually, and I thought this appropriate to start with this. This is the tomb, we think, of King Narmer. Now, King Narmer was the very first pharaoh of a unified Egypt. So the evidence suggests that Narmer unified Upper Egypt with Lower Egypt, which is something that had never previously been done, and ruled Egypt as an entire country. Whereas before, in King Scorpion's time, there was a distinct kingdom in the north and a distinct kingdom in the south, but Narmer was able to unify those kingdoms. So the concept of burying royalty with grave goods likely evolved from the natural mummification of bodies buried in the sand. So mummification was taking place in the Old Kingdom. We have found evidence of that. And mummification likely derived from even peasantry used to bury their dead. And this is one of the ways that religion kind of evolves. Jackals used to dig up the bodies, which is a bit awful. And then the Egyptians would see that the bodies had become desiccated in the hot sand like this and preserved. So this is where they got the idea of mummification and possibly eternal life. And this is why they left grave goods and actually started burying people deliberately in chamber tombs. So these chamber tombs evolved. So this one here, this is another one at Abydos. And this is only 2 generations after Narmer. This is Narmer's grandson, King Dier. So you can see that we have one huge pit here. Now this would have been the grave of Dier. You see all these other smaller graves around here. Now, a long time ago, they used to teach us that when the Egyptian pharaoh died, if you were his servant, his wife, or anybody else close to him, you got sacrificed along with him. They'd lock you in the tomb and forget about you with the pharaoh because you needed to serve pharaoh in the afterlife. So that's not entirely untrue. And back in the very beginning, they did actually used to do this. So if you were Pharaoh's vizier, if you were his handmaiden, if you emptied Pharaoh's chamber pot in the end, and this is one of many of these tombs, you were sacrificed and buried alongside the Pharaoh to serve him in the afterlife. Now, of course, this became too much for the population. So they were just sacrificing more and more and more of what we call retainers. And it was becoming a huge drain on the population. So it was something that was phased out. And in place of that, the Egyptians carved small figurines called shabtis. So they're about that big. And they have an inscription on the front of them that says, "Come Shabti and do it for me." So the theory was that you buried these little figurines with the king, and then the king would speak the spell in the afterlife, and the Shabti would come to life and get the king whatever he wanted, which is a lot nicer than sacrificing everybody so that they would be there with him. So in the Second Dynasty, royal tombs moved to the site of Saqqara and became immense labyrinths of underground galleries. So this is also part of the evolution of pyramid building. We're not sure why this happened. It possibly could be because the thought of the idea of the Egyptian spirit was evolving, and the Egyptians thought the king needed an actual palace or a house or somewhere for his spirit to reside rather than just a pit. where he was, covered over with sand. This particular tomb is the tomb of a pharaoh called Ninetcha. It actually still contains traces of a superstructure. Now, a superstructure, again, is like a pyramid, which indicates that there was something built over the top of this tomb. Now, there's quite a few of these tombs at Saqqara, but this is the only one that has any trace of a superstructure. So what we have found is that it's possibly like a platform that's used for the pharaoh's funeral cult, as well as rock steps, which are probably the remains of a mastaba. So the pharaoh's funeral cult, pyramids and mastabas and gallery tombs, and even the pit tombs in Abydos, they weren't meant for you like we do today in Western civilization. You bury someone in the graveyard and you might go and visit them once or twice a year. They had adjoining temples. The nobility went and visited, the family went and visited. You went and spent time with the dead, especially the king, and you still worshipped the king. The king expected to be worshipped for eternity. So there was always a temple there, or a cult, or an altar, something there to ensure the king's spirit lived on into the afterlife, and that's how that part of how that happened. So I just want to talk about a little bit about usurpation and reuse. So, we have these tombs and we talk about found traces of a superstructure. Like, what does that even mean? Why is there only a trace left? So it's important to note that in the time of later monuments like Saqqara, you've got the Step Pyramid, you've got much later pyramids of the 6th dynasty and beyond. You got the Serapeum. It's the largest necropolis in Egypt. It's very important to remember that things like the tomb of Ninetcha and the gallery tombs and whatever was already there at that time, they were already ancient monuments and they were crumbling at this time. So it was actually common practice throughout Egyptian history, not just in the Old Kingdom, for pharaohs to reuse building materials from other pharaohs' monuments. It was also common practice for pharaohs in later times to outrightly steal credit for other people's monuments. So if you know Ramses II apparently built everything in Egypt because his name is absolutely everywhere. And we know from other inscriptions, from tracing cartouches, which is little sacred ropes with the pharaoh's name, where he doesn't do anything properly, Ramses II. So chisels somebody else's name out, but he hasn't done it so that we can't really read who actually, built the monument, because it wasn't Ramses. And this is why, even if archaeologists found a contemporary manuscript with the Great Pyramid of Giza detailing who it was built by with Khufu's name on it, we still couldn't take that to the bank, because the Egyptian pharaohs make things up to make themselves look good in the eyes of the gods, in the eyes of the people, and most importantly, in the eyes of people who come after them. The more times your name is read, the more times your name is on a building, the greater your afterlife will be. Speak my name and I will live forever is the spell that goes along with the pharaoh in the pyramid texts. So they believed that if people were still talking about you like we are now, it would help you to live forever. So that was their belief, hence why they put their names everywhere. And that is actually where putting names on public buildings comes from. That's where the idea comes from. Obviously, we have a different idea about it today, but that is where it originated. So, fun fact. So this is a mastaba today. So this is hypothesized as one of the first mastabas. I don't particularly agree with who it's ascribed to because it doesn't make any sense. So this is Khazekemui, who is a later pharaoh of the third dynasty. And this is supposedly his mastaba at Maidoom, which to me makes no sense because this is his pit tomb at Abydos. And this next to it is the enclosure that goes with it, which archaeologists still have absolutely no idea what it is, except that it resembles the festival court of King Zoser, which we'll have a look at next. So a mastaba, so if we look at this, so this is this is not a royal mastaba. This is, or it could be a royal mastaba, but you know, we don't know. This is a better example. This is a better example of a mastaba. So this is mastaba 17 at my doom. So there's quite a lot of mastabas at my doom. So this is, as I said before, it's the Arabic word for bench. You can see it does kind of look like a bench. And these were the precursor structures to pyramid building. And after pyramid building sort of took over, the mastaba building actually fell to officials. So the pharaoh didn't use them anymore because there was, you know, who wouldn't, would you rather be buried in a pyramid or that? So his officials ended up building mastabas. So there's a lot of non-royal mastabas that survive today, but because mastaba building was something that for royalty happened very early on, there's not a lot of royal mastabas kind of remaining. And this is the interior. So this is the interior of mastaba 17 at my doom. You can see there's a lot of the tunnels have actually collapsed. But you can see that there is a stone sarcophagus in there. You can see the niche that it's in. This is not dissimilar to the sarcophagus in the burial chamber in the Great Pyramid. And this is what the mastaba would have looked like in its heyday. I mean, obviously this is an artist's rendition. The picture below is more of a plan. So you can see that they had a shaft going down into the bedrock and then a burial chamber. Others have much more complex labyrinth designs underneath them. And if you look at this one, this is Egyptians tried to replicate things as they were in life. So the hypothesis on this one is that this is what an Egyptian palace would have looked like, which we can tell from reliefs that we have. So this is probably what a mastaba would have looked like because it was the pharaoh's house of eternity and he would have wanted it to look like his palace. And also this sort of architecture has been found in later designs as well. Okay, the step pyramid, our very first pyramid. So this was built by King Zoser of the Third Dynasty. So he was the last pharaoh of the Third Dynasty. And it wasn't built as a step pyramid originally. So originally, you can see by these plans here, it shows you the building stages. So you can see that it was originally designed as a mastaba. And then it was extended. And then for some reason, the architect decided, hey, let's make it a huge square. Let's extend it the other way. Because building up can only get you so far when you don't have access to concrete and you don't have access to steel. So this is how the ancient Egyptians discovered that stacking one thing on top of another, one smaller thing on top of another smaller thing on top of another smaller thing, was the most engineeringly sound way of constructing a very large structure. And then other squares were added on top. So other square mastabas were added on top, and then it was extended again. So we can actually tell this pyramid has been forensically examined. It's not built of giant stones. Like Great Pyramid, it's built of much smaller stones. So it's not mud brick, which is why it hasn't collapsed. But it is built of much smaller stones, and it does make it much easier to sort of examine the construction because you can still kind of see when you walk up to it closely, you can kind of see the lines of these different structures that were there, because that was a structure and then that was a structure. And then this was a structure, and then this was a structure, and you can kind of see that it wasn't kind of planned like this. And just as a fun fact, that obviously there are pyramids all over the world, and other civilizations obviously discovered that a pyramid was the easiest way to build tall structure. But we are still using this kind of engineering today. Interestingly, the Aswan High Dam is actually a pyramid structure. If you were to look at the actual plans of it, you can't see half of it because obviously half of it's underwater. It's actually built like this because it is, even with steel and concrete, it is still the most sound way to build a tall building, especially one with, hundreds of thousands of pressure water behind it. It's just obviously not practical to use for building in a city. So we don't use it for that. We obviously use skyscrapers for that because we do have concrete and steel. It's important also to note that pyramids didn't stand alone. So it's not like you've got a pyramid and that's it in the desert. There's other points of interest that go with a pyramid. So if you look at this, this is a picture I took of the step pyramid while it was being renovated. And you can see here the original mastaba structure. And then you can see here where it was extended. So this is a really great picture of the front of what we think is the front of the pyramid here. But this here, this open space here, this is a wall. I'm actually standing on the enclosure wall. So this is fenced of sorts. And you remember the enclosure of Khazad Kamui that I showed you? This is why it's been billed as a Heb-Sed festival court. So the Heb-Sed festival in ancient Egypt was a festival that was held every 3 years. And it was held for the living king to demonstrate that he was still fit and able to rule and still able to be Ra's representative on earth. And from the inscriptions and depictions of the king that we actually have of him running this festival, it involved him running laps around this court. So as in life, so in death, they constructed a festival court for Zoser's pyramid so that his car could run the festival even after he died. This is the South Tomb, purpose unknown. And as you can see, if you remember that artist rendition of the mastaba that I showed you, you can see the edifice here. And it's constructed like a palace. You can see the uraeus or the cobra along here. So again, as in life, so in death. There are numerous hypotheses on what this structure is for. It could be a cenotaph. The leading theory is that it is a tomb for the king's car, which is an iteration of the Egyptian spirit. So the Egyptian spirit actually has 5 different iterations, and there are only 2 that we know quite a bit about. The others are still a bit hazy. We don't quite understand. But the car is the iteration of the spirit that needs a body to inhabit. Hence why mummification came about, because if you didn't have a body, you had nowhere for your car to reside. And this is also something that was found here, which I don't think I have a picture of, is a house for the king's car with a car statue. So there's a lovely green diorite statue, which is now in the Cairo Museum of Djoser. And this is where the car was supposed to reside if the king's body was destroyed. And a lot of the time, if you found a statue, and a lot of pyramids and a lot of mastabas, they have found these car statues of the pharaoh that built them, and obviously that makes attributing the pyramid to somebody much easier. So the South Tomb, underneath the South Tomb, there are these fabulous galleries. So there is a labyrinth of galleries under this pyramid and under the South Tomb, and they've just reopened, which is amazing. I never thought they'd reopen them. They've been renovating this pyramid and the galleries for as long as I can remember. And under this pyramid, there are these beautiful galleries with inlaid faience tiles. So faience is a type of glass they used to use in ancient Egypt, and the like of which has never been seen before or since in any kind of tomb building. So this is unprecedented. And here is at the front of the pyramid. This is surrounded by the enclosure wall. This is the funerary temple. So this is the temple I was saying before about king's cult in the afterlife, where the king was like, you're still going to worship me even though I'm dead. This is where that's going to happen. You're going to bring offerings. There's going to be priests working there. So that is also a part of the pyramid. It's not just a pyramid by itself. So this is the next pyramid. So this is the Maidoom pyramid. So we've already visited Maidoom before when we looked at Mastaba 17. This pyramid was originally ascribed to Sneferu, but building 3 pyramids seems a bit far-fetched. So I think they've ascribed it to Pharaoh Huni, which also does make some sense because they found chips from this pyramid. So limestone chips that match this pyramid in the core of Mastaba 17, and it makes sense to ascribe that Mastaba to Huni because he was not buried here. So his pyramid collapsed before he died, and he was buried elsewhere because this is not fit to bury a king in. So this is the construction of this particular pyramid. So this was their first attempt at building a true pyramid, but like the step pyramid, that's not how it started. So they thought, let's build a step pyramid. And then sort of halfway through construction, they decided, you know what, we can fill in these steps to make it a true pyramid and it's going to look, you know, amazing. But because they didn't start out that way, it didn't end up that way. So they originally tried to use smooth edges with a limestone casing, which didn't work from an engineering perspective. There are numerous failures with the construction. So the outer layer was not built on bedrock, which is very important. It was built on a layer of sand. So obviously as the sand shifted, the stone shifted, and it just kind of, the sides just fell away. The outer steps of the pyramid are also highly polished and not horizontal, which also, contributed to its collapse. It is a very cool looking pyramid. Most people don't look at it as a pyramid. They just see this weird tower-like structure when they're on their way up from the Fayum Oasis. But you can actually go in there. You can actually go into this one. And obviously it's a very cool experience because these other pyramids, apart from, the Zoser pyramid, nobody visits. So you don't have to share these with anybody when you go to Egypt because people really don't know about them. This is the next one. So this is Pharaoh Sneferu's first pyramid. Sneferu doesn't get enough credit, in my opinion. He built 2 pyramids, even though this one was a fail. But this is my favorite. This is my favorite. I love this pyramid because it didn't fall down, but it is still a giant mistake. And this is the one I show people when they talk to me about aliens, because why would aliens who flew hundreds of thousands of light years come down and leave a giant mistake? So the bent pyramid, this is their first attempt at a planned true pyramid. But unfortunately with this one, while they did clear the base of sand, which was good because the shifting sands had no effect on this pyramid, it was too steep. And they only realized that about halfway up, and they changed the incline, giving the pyramid its bent appearance. Another theory with this one is, it is just a theory and you can't possibly prove this, but the leading theory on pyramid construction is that pyramids were built via the use of ramps. And because of the incline, it was believed that the ramp structure needed to complete the pyramid at this gradient wasn't feasible. And this was only realized once they reached the halfway point. To me, that seems a bit far-fetched. I like the other the other theory better, and engineers can kind of prove that the pyramid would not have supported itself at the original incline and would have failed. But the ancient Egyptians did realize that, so they did end up with a pyramid. But Sneferu wasn't satisfied with the bent pyramid, so he built another pyramid, which is the red pyramid, which is this pyramid behind me, which is another of my favorites, because you can see I'm very spoiled as far as my archaeological sites go. I don't like sharing them. And you can see there is not another soul at this place. So this is the first true pyramid, and it was designed that way, and they did it. It was built as the same angle, 43 degrees, as the upper section of the bent pyramid, which shows that the ancient Egyptians were learning. They were learning from their mistakes. The pyramid is named because it has kind of reddish appearance from the stone that is underneath. It was originally cased in white Tura limestone. Tura is the name of the quarry in the south where the limestone came from. Most of this, unfortunately, has been stolen for building projects within Cairo. So this pyramid didn't always look steppy and blocky like this, and neither did the Great Pyramid. But the outer casing of the pyramid was stolen for other building projects. This is the interior. So again, you can go inside this pyramid. You can see here, my best friend traveled with me on this particular trip, and he's taking the photo. This is the shaft you have to crawl down. It's the experience of going in this pyramid is probably the best experience that you can get as far as pyramids go in Egypt. When you go to Giza, like it's obviously magical. It's the last wonder of the ancient world. But the idea that you have in your head, and if you travel, you know what I'm talking about. You have this idea in your head that, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be me and the pyramids in the desert alone, listening to the sands of time. And it's just not like that. The pyramids, Giza is a crappy area. It's a crappy area. It's just outside. It's not even in Cairo. It's a suburb on the outskirts of Cairo. It's a bad area. If you ask any Egyptian, they'll tell you it's a bad area. It's not a place. It's not even a good place to stay. There's lots of fancy hotels there, but people who stay there just wouldn't leave your hotel. When you go to the pyramids, there's obviously thousands of other tourists who all want to see the pyramids. Understandably, it is the last wonder. They are the last wonder of the ancient world. There's also hasslers. Unfortunately, in Egypt, there is this culture of hassling tourists, and it's not specific to Egypt. It exists all over the world. I mean, it's Mexico and Indonesia and Thailand and Morocco and Uzbekistan, and unfortunately, it's everywhere. But unfortunately, it is the worst in Egypt. I've never experienced anything like the hassling in Egypt, and you're trying to stand there and appreciate the Great Pyramid, and there's someone tugging on your sleeve who wants to sell you some papyrus or a perfume or even a carpet. And it's just this, it obviously detracts from the entire experience. There's also camel hustlers. They're hassling you for camel ride. There's horse drivers hassling you for a horse and buggy ride. The horse drivers are especially cruel, which obviously dampens the experience because nobody wants to see cruelty to animals. But here at the Red Pyramid, the fantasy that people have about standing in front of the pyramids, you can actually get. That experience does exist. You can stand in front of this pyramid in silence, listening to the sand and, hearing the whispers of history. You can climb into the burial chamber. You can go down this shaft and climb up a wooden staircase that was built by, the original archaeologists in the early 1900s, and crawl into the burial chamber. You want your Indiana Jones moment in Egypt? Here it is. This is a great experience. And it's one that I always have when I go to Egypt, and obviously one that we include on our tours. So it was a long journey, but we're finally here at the pyramids of Giza. So you can see what a long way the Egyptians came from their very first pit tombs to the Great Pyramid. So let's have a look at the Great Pyramid. So we estimate that it took about 20 years to build this. Common misconception, it wasn't built by slaves. It was built by professional builders year round and by farmers during the inundation. Now, if you think of, you can't think of Egyptian civilization like you think of our civilization. It's completely different. So Egyptians in the Old Kingdom, not so much in the New Kingdom, but in the Old Kingdom, considered their efforts to build their pharaoh's tomb, who was God on earth, as their ticket to an afterlife. This is how I get my afterlife. So it was a great honor to do this. No one was being forced. They didn't have to force people. People in the off season, so in the off season of the farming, the farming situation, the farmers used to volunteer to do this. So one thing that we didn't have until quite recently with the Great Pyramid, in which we have found out other pyramid sites, is a pyramid town. So basically what they did when they decided on a site for a pyramid was they set up a town close to the pyramid for the workers to live. We hadn't found that until very recently at Giza, but we have found it now. And there are evidence of, peasant burials there, and the vertebrae of these people are absolutely crushed. So, which obviously indicates hard labor, and indicates that, they were lifting very heavy loads, pulling very heavy loads. But it also we have found the rubbish pits. Rubbish pits are an absolute gold mine to a real archaeologist. Everybody loves a rubbish pit. And what we have found in there are cattle bones. Now you might ask, why is that significant? They ate steak. Who cares? Cow meat, beef, was the most expensive thing you could eat in ancient Egypt. You don't give that to slaves. Slaves get rubbish to eat. Slaves get rotten vegetables. They don't eat beef. There's no way these people were slaves. There's no way these people were eating beef. There's no way. So during the planting and the harvest, the pyramids were built by these professional builders who lived in the pyramid towns. But you may or may not know that Egypt had 3 seasons. So it had a planting, had a harvest, and it had a flood. So during the flood season, which was 4 months a year, the farmers didn't have anything to do. So they were then added to the pharaoh's construction crew. And the construction crew got a bit of a bolster. So the pyramid itself contains 3 chambers. It's at 51.5 degrees. It's a little bit steeper than the Red Pyramid, so they got a bit more ambitious with the incline. And the king's chamber is likely where Khufu was buried. The other 2 chambers are the Queen's Chamber and the Abandoned Chamber, but they are just names. We don't know if a queen was buried there. It seems unlikely. The Queen's Chamber might have been for the king's car, so the king's spirit. And the Abandoned Chamber, probably, it's very rough. It probably is just that. It does look abandoned. They probably did tunnel into the earth and then decided that, the pharaoh deserved better. He would be closer to heaven. He would get, you can see from the point of the vaulting on the king's chamber, it points towards the sky and it points towards the pyramidion. And that obviously helps the pharaoh to ascend into the sky. Again, all hypotheses, but taken from the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. Khafre's pyramid, which is the second pyramid. So this is often mistaken for the Great Pyramid. In fact, I stumbled upon an article on MSN that was talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza, and this was their picture. I was like, wow, you guys really should know better. This is not the Great Pyramid. So the reason it's often mistaken is the capstone, which isn't a capstone. This is the remains of the limestone casing. So if you look at this, the Pyramid of Giza, the Red Pyramid, the Pyramid of Menkaura, which we'll look at next, they were all cased like this with smooth sides. That's what they would have looked like all over. So it's really cool that Khafre's pyramid still has that. The other reason that it's often mistaken for the Great Pyramid, it's actually built on higher ground. So it's kind of an illusion. So it's built a little bit higher up. So it makes it look bigger, but it actually isn't. So it only has one confirmed chamber. Its chamber is underground. If you go to Egypt on the standard tour, this is the pyramid you'll be taken into with 1,000 other people. If you're claustrophobic, it's definitely not the one to go in, because the shaft, you can see the shaft, this is the entrance here. The shaft goes down, 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 and you can't stand up. Even me, I'm 5'4". There's no way I can stand. I'm bent fully over to get down there. There are people going in both directions. It's not an overly pleasant experience to go in, especially in high season. It does open up into quite a large burial chamber with G. Belzoni scrawled on the wall, who was the old world archaeologist in the 1800s who tunneled in there, and Giovanni Belzoni, he wrote his name on everything because, I don't know, maybe he believed the same thing as the ancient Egyptians, that, you know, if you read my name, I'll live forever. He certainly was prolific about doing things like that. So Menkaura's pyramid, which is the smallest one, but it packs, in my opinion, it packs a bit more of a punch. Well, maybe as much of a punch as the other two. Although it's smaller, it is a bit more sturdy, because it has a core of red granite. So granite was usually reserved for the sarcophagus. So granite is obviously very hard. Granite is a very, very hard stone, very hard to cut. Very hard to sort of think about how they would have cut that in the Old Kingdom with no access to bronze, or steel. So it would have taken them a long, long, long time to build this little pyramid with its core of granite. It contains 2 burial chambers, and it's built at an incline of 51.2 degrees. And it's the first pyramid since the step pyramid to include any kind of interior design. One of the chambers has decorative panels in it, which is really odd, because the Great Pyramid has no decoration inside at all. Neither does Khufu's pyramid or the Red Pyramid or the Bent Pyramid or the Maidum Pyramid. None of them have anything on the walls whatsoever, apart from G. Belzoni in Khufu's pyramid. Thank you, Belzoni, for that. So that is something that's a bit different about this pyramid. You can go in all 3 pyramids at Giza. The Great Pyramid, they only let 100 people in per day. It is worth camping out to get the tickets. They do 50 people in the morning, 50 people in the afternoon. The ticket office isn't as hard to find as the first time I went in. It was this broken down, abandoned looking old building. But it's definitely a better experience because the galleries in the Grand Pyramid are very high. You don't have to duck. You're obviously not sharing it with, thousands of people. They're very conscious about conserving the Great Pyramid, which is great. The reason they only let 100 people in per day is condensation. So they were letting as many people in as they were Khufu's pyramid, but mold was growing on the walls. And this is because people take a bottle of water and they exhale, and they exhale humidity. And in the dry heat of Egypt, that humidity clings to the walls and eventually turns into mold. And we don't want that in the Great Pyramid. So that's another fun fact. So what happened? What happened after the pyramids of Giza? We get these type of pyramids. They just look like mounds of rubble, don't they? Some of these were in the Middle Kingdom, which is the period of prosperity after the Old Kingdom. Some of these are still in the Old Kingdom, like this one here. This is Teti's pyramid at Saqqara. It's only a few hundred years later. So obviously, pyramid building was a massive, massive, massive expense. It was a huge undertaking, and as pharaohs looked for more and more shortcuts into pyramid building, the quality of the build went down. Later pyramids are often built with a stone core and then cased in mud brick. So mud brick doesn't really last. So the mud brick sort of breaks down over time, leaving the pyramid looking like a glorified mound. But the good news is, because the chambers and the interior built of stone, often you can still access them. So you can still actually go in them. And the later pyramids do have things on the walls, which is obviously really cool. At the end of the Old Kingdom, there is also evidence of drought and famine, which was brought about by a series of low Niles. So we talked about Egypt and its 3 seasons. So the flood was very important. So you'd have the flood, and what would happen is the Nile River, which was the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, would flood and leave a layer of the most fertile silt soil over the top of the farmland. And then the planting would begin. So a low Nile meant that there wasn't much farmland to go around, or if the inundation didn't happen, there was no crop. So no crop meant no food. Egypt was fairly isolated at the time. So in later times, like the New Kingdom, Egypt was trading extensively with Canaan, even with Sudan, or which was Nubia back then, and even with Crete. Even with, the island of Crete, there's evidence for that. And as far away as Ethiopia. But in the Old Kingdom, nothing. Egypt was, apart from a few Nubian incursions from the south, Egypt was completely isolated, so there was no hope of getting any food anywhere else. And as people were starving, there weren't enough resources, either human or material, that could be allocated to pyramid building. And this would have weakened the pharaoh's power in turn. So he, as I said before, he was worshipped as God on earth. He wasn't just a representative of Ra, he was Ra. He is Ra on earth. And as such, he was responsible for Egypt's prosperity, including the annual flooding of the Nile. So the Egyptians deemed him responsible for this famine. And we can see that in the king lists of Abydos. So King Seti I went back and recorded all the pharaohs of history, and there are a few other king lists as well. And there's a series of very short or unrecorded reigns that show the pharaohs themselves were not surviving long enough to build their houses of eternity. Now, this could be because of the famine themselves. Maybe they simply starved to death. That seems unlikely for royalty. It's more likely that this was due to assassinations and palace coups. So what now? What happened after pyramid building? So in the 6th dynasty, so this is shortly after the building of the Giza pyramids, the pyramid texts emerged. So if you go into these rubble type pyramids, it's Saqqara Unas, King Unas of the 6th dynasty, was the first to have the pyramid text carved on his walls. These are a series of spells and instructions for passing through the realm of the dead and into the presence of Osiris, or ascending to the heavens. So these texts eventually became the coffin texts in the Middle Kingdom. So we see a lot of coffins in museums with beautiful reliefs and inscriptions inside them. These are the coffin texts, which evolved from the pyramid texts after pyramids stopped being built. And then in the New Kingdom, in the time of, say, Tutankhamun, which we're all familiar with, or Ramses II, they became the Book of the Dead. And these were inscribed on the walls of gallery tombs, which is what we see in the Valley of the Kings. And for, lesser individuals like viziers, for example, they were often put in the coffin or somewhere in the tomb on rolls of papyrus, which you can see today in the Egyptian Museum. Now, the New Kingdom gallery tombs may seem a far, far cry from pyramid building. However, if you look at the mountain in which they're built, it's in the shape of a pyramid. So one of the reasons pyramid building was not picked up again, even in a time of great prosperity in the New Kingdom, was Egypt's golden age, absolute golden age. So if it was ever going to be picked up again, this was the time. But they did realize that the pyramid was like saying to tomb robbers, come and steal all my stuff. This is where it is. It's a beacon. So the very first pharaohs who were buried in the Valley of the Kings, so Thutmose I was the first to be buried there, and we still haven't actually found his original tomb. He actually killed all the workers who knew where it was. So there is likely a tomb out there that is undiscovered and potentially full of artifacts like Tutankhamun's was, but probably a lot bigger. So another common misconception is that it was old world archaeologists of the 1800s that plundered the Valley of the Kings. It's not true. Most of the Valley of the Kings was unfortunately plundered in antiquity. It was only Tutmosis III, we think, who went to such drastic means as killing all the workers for the tomb. That didn't happen in later times. We know this because the workers actually have their own little valley in the Valley of the Kings. Well, near the Valley of the Kings, it's called the Valley of the Workers, where they have their own very small but beautiful tombs. So clearly this wasn't happening because they wouldn't have had their own tombs if they'd been murdered by the pharaoh or the vizier or whoever. So most tombs were plundered within a year of being the king being buried. They weren't actually plundered by old world archaeologists. Artifacts, however, obviously did find their way, did survive through time, found their way onto the black market, and that's a lot of the time how they got into museums of today. So that is the end of the lecture. I hope you've enjoyed it. So we do have a tour going to Egypt, which I'm leading in September. So all of these wonderful pyramids we'll be visiting. So the Bent Pyramid, Red Pyramid, Doom Pyramid. Of course, we're going to go inside them and explore them. So we have a private tour of the new Grand Egyptian Museum, which is long awaited. So that's open. They're doing kind of a soft opening of that now. And we also have a private visit to a real archaeological dig. So we're going to visit Hierakonpolis. So at the beginning of the lecture, I talked about King Narmer. Hierakonpolis was his city, and it was the very first capital of a unified Egypt. And obviously, because you've attended the lecture, you're entitled to a discount. So we're giving 1,000 Australian dollars off per person if booked and deposited within the next 5 days. So if booked by Friday, you just need to use the code lecture at checkout, or if you call or email, you can just tell us I was at the lecture. All this information will come in an email afterwards, so you don't have to memorize it or write it down. So that's just a little bit about the tour if you've enjoyed it. Obviously, I'll be leading it. I can't wait. I love sharing my passion for ancient Egypt with everybody. We'll also have an expert Egyptologist guide with us, so you get me and the guide. Looking forward to fantastic debates over drinks and over dinner at the end of the day, and unpacking the things that we've seen and sharing all our theories and wonderful knowledge together. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask me? No? No questions? If you're watching this on recording, feel free to put a question in the comment section. I'll happily follow up with you. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed it. And if there's no questions, I'll end it here. But thank you so much for attending. And it would be great to see you in Egypt in September. Thank you, everyone.